Hello, friends. I'm sorry if you guys missed me. I just took a small life break because I went on a little trip for my friend's birthday. I know y'all are like, damn, you just took a break for the holidays, but baby, life be life, and so I had to give me a little bit of a break. But I'm back. We are here to review the latest episode of The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. TBH, this was one of the, I almost said like the best episode for me, but I'm not going to act like I remember each and every episode up until now this season. But this is one of the better ones for me. I really enjoyed it. I like the pacing of it. I like the stories that were being told, and I just kind of like the different elements of it. I feel like it gave me a lot to watch as opposed to some of the last episodes where it's just like it feels very drawn out, and we're really just here to talk about, oh, it's weirdness between Kyle and Mauricio, but we don't get any details. Oh, Anne-Marie is going to get into it with Crystal and Sutton about Sutton's esophagus, but we don't really get it. So now I feel like we finally got some pieces to all of those things. We're still kind of teeter-tottering around the Kyle and Mauricio story, and that's getting extremely old. But we did get some more context in this episode, so fine. So we started the episode. I really liked. I feel like this is so Housewives-esque, and I feel like they kind of lose it sometimes. Like, they do it, but they don't do it to the full extent. I like the little clip intros that they do for everybody. It wasn't everybody, but it was a few of the housewives where they kind of go into the house, show a little quick sneak peek of what they're doing, and then they come back out and go to somebody else. I just enjoy that, and then we land on, our primary starting scene. So that already made me feel like, okay, I like the way that this episode was done. We land on, we're at Sutton's house, and Kyle shows up, and I don't really know the context between why they were hanging out, but they were hanging out, whatever. And they're discussing the whole Anne-Marie thing, and Sutton is talking about last episode, which we didn't review. Basically, we left off with this cliffhanger of them being at Kyle's event, and Anne-Marie was having a conversation with basically everybody, but more primarily she was having a conversation with Garcelle and with Crystal, and she had implied that Sutton may have an eating disorder because she's still trying to debunk this whole theory that she has about Sutton's esophagus, something that just absolutely does not matter, especially for somebody's first season, especially for somebody that doesn't have a backstory or a storyline, or we don't really know why they're here, but we'll get into that later. We left off on this cliffhanger with Garcelle coming to Sutton at the event and saying, Anne-Marie's coming for you, boom, whatever. So Sutton's now having that conversation with Kyle, and they both pretty much agree. Here's one of my qualms. So Kyle's basically saying, like, Sutton has had blow-ups about, weird and ridiculous things before, and she's already said that. I feel like that's a replay of something that she already said in the prior episode, and they do these flashbacks that we've already seen this season. I'm getting that a lot across the Housewives metaverse, like in every single Housewives franchise that's on right now, they keep replaying the same flashbacks like every 2 episodes, and it's getting exhausting. Like, I know that people's memories are different, but I don't think that anybody's memory is that bad. But yeah, they do a flashback of Sutton getting upset about the pants for the stripper thing in Vegas, which was silly, and the leather pants thing with Crystal, which was hilarious last season, and then her getting upset about something that happened in 2020. I don't know, whatever. So then, Kyle then says it seems like she's met her match, and I feel like she's referencing the fact that this bone that Anne-Marie has to pick is also ridiculous. So I think she's trying to say that. So that was fun banter for me. I'm fine with that. Episode's going great. And finally, they talk about the fact that they're going to Spain. I guess they're going to be right outside of Barcelona, but I'm sure they'll move around. And Sutton is basically saying she doesn't want Anne-Marie to go unless she apologizes. Kyle is kind of being that anchor and saying, well, you can't disinvite her or uninvite her, whatever the word is. You already invited her. And Sutton's like, I'm not. I just want an apology. So I don't mind that conversation. Fine, let's move forward. And I think it shows us what we have to look forward to in the episode. So, cool. We now move on to Crystal and Garcelle, and what I'm realizing, I don't know if it's always like this, to be honest, because I don't really remember it always being like this, but it's sticking out to me now. A lot of the theme of this episode, at least, is like seeing the ladies have individual conversations with each other and then coming together as a group. We get a lot of phone calls in this episode, so I like that at the very least. And, now Crystal's on the phone with Garcelle, and they're discussing the Anne-Marie thing as well. And Crystal's, talking more about the fact that, Anne-Marie was implying that Sutton may have an eating disorder that has to, contribute to her esophagus thing or whatever. And obviously we all know that that's a terrible thing to say. And I think it probably struck more of a nerve with Crystal because she had or has an eating disorder. I don't know if it's ongoing or, but she's had experience with eating disorder, so it probably struck her a little bit more, but she didn't really speak to that. And then we got a preview of this, but Crystal is saying, when she met Anne-Marie, I guess it was 4 months prior, it was at a Christmas party or something like that. Anne-Marie told her that she was a doctor. And I look, I don't know anything about the doctors and all that stuff, but I do vaguely feel like Anne-Marie told us she was an anesthesiologist, or I don't know if somebody else said that. I'm not sure. I know Dr. Nicole on Miami, I believe, is an anesthesiologist, so maybe I'm confusing all of these things. I don't know. But from Crystal's mouth to our ears, Anne-Marie told her, or represented to her, that she was a doctor, and now she's going around saying, I'm a nurse esthetician. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but I guess we'll see. I'm really happy that we get this scene with Crystal and her brother. This storyline really just was not sticking for me, and I didn't really, when it was introduced at the beginning of the season, I was just like, why? And then even when it was brought up a little bit later, I was like, why? But I feel like as she talked about it a bit, even though I was like, her brother's nowhere to be found, I was understanding the tradition and the family impact that it had, and how basically her brother's very close to her as a sister and very close to the mom, and so, welcoming another woman in the family as a partner or a spouse or whatever is challenging. And, Crystal's talking about being overbearing with her brother and protective. So that kind of all came together for me. I feel like they could have gotten that out sooner, but fine, we can do it now, whatever. And, he's back from Asia. He had been there for a while. He's telling her, basically he's decided, I feel like he's deciding to have some independence from his family. He's recognizing that it's there, and he's recognizing that if he dates a woman in the future, then they're going to have to accept that, but his family's also going to have to accept that. So he's setting boundaries for himself. Great, awesome. And he lets her know, he's going to be spending half of the year in Asia and half of the year in America. And he also talks about the fact that, he got to meet with his ex-fiance, which was a part of this storyline, and I guess they had some type of closure. So I didn't mind that. I hope that we're done talking about it. But I feel like it circled around enough for me to be like, cool, that's a complete story. It makes sense to me. Let's move on, please. Obviously, the undertone of this episode is that they're going to be having the homeless, not toothless event. And so I still think it's very funny. Like, I honestly think that was a very funny thing last season that nobody could really remember the name. Even I had to really sit here and think about it. And so the fact that they kept that theme going throughout this episode, I just thought that was a really funny undertone to the episode, and I enjoyed it. But while Mo and Kyle are, in the car on their way to the event, Mo, two things that he said that struck me. He says, "How was the event?" Like, not like, how are you feeling about your friend's death? Or like, emotionally, how are you? Or how was your event? Just like the language. I don't know, just saying how was the event sounds so just general and vague to me, as if she went to, like, I don't know, a baby shower. But like, she hosted a memorial for the 1 year anniversary of the death of her best friend, and you weren't there. So the way that he asked that question already felt very weird to me. And then also, the second thing that really struck me was him asking, were any of the other men there? And I'm like, why does that really matter? You know what I'm saying? Because that sounds like an implication of like, oh, if anybody else's husband showed up, I would feel bad because I should have been there, but you should have been there anyway because it's your wife's friend. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, because I feel like they showed Sutton talking about it a lot, and I kind of got over the fact that Sutton was even talking about the fact that Mauricio wasn't there, but it is a good point to bring up. But we move on. I mean, we know, like, I'm kind of just tired of seeing, and I'm a dynamics girl. I talk about it all the time. I want to see dynamics, da 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 da. But I'm so tired of seeing these very short, clipped, hinty, like, dynamic scenes with Mauricio and Kyle, like they're building up to something. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like if they wanted to piecemeal it like that, and we didn't know that like a separation / divorce was down the pipeline, then it would be a little bit more impactful, because then it would probably hit us on the side of the head at the end of the season when we find out, oh, this is what was happening with the dynamic. But we already know. We knew the state of that relationship before the season started. So them piecemealing it to us and not really giving us anything, like, we get so many bits and pieces about Morgan. We get so many bits and pieces about them having weird conversation. Bits and pieces about this tattoo stuff. Like, it's old. It's so old. Like, get to the goddamn point. And I also just felt like I'm not invested in this banter, right? Like, Kyle told him that she was going to be going to Spain and she was doing something else before that, and he was shocked because he didn't get a heads up. And she's in her confessional saying, it's kind of like a getting back at him because he doesn't really give me a heads up of where he's going. And I just feel like we probably all been there. I've been there. I just feel like when a relationship gets to that point where you're doing this tit for tat stuff, the relationship's most definitely over, especially if you've been married for umpteen years and you guys have several children together and you're grown adults. It's the relationship's over. So I'm just not really trying to hear that. It's old. I do think that this another really good part of this episode was like the humor that was mixed in between. So I really enjoyed seeing like Erica come to the event and she's talking to this man. And he's like, "You look beautiful," and she doesn't recognize that it's her dentist. And then he immediately she starts talking to him like, "Oh, I was gonna come back in about something with my mouth," and he's like, "Let me see your teeth." And he's literally checking her teeth at this event. So I thought that was hilarious. That was a good part of this episode as well. And it gave me an opportunity to enjoy Erica because I just don't typically enjoy Erica. More bits and pieces about Kyle, and she basically, more hints dropped. They're doing the red carpet. She's doing it with Mauricio, and she says, when she comes to events, she feels like people are watching her and Mo, and it feels weird. But again, we know that this is just pretext for a story ending that we already know. I would rather her, if she's going to drop that hint, I would rather it come with a little bit of context. Because all she's saying is, I feel like people are watching us to see how our body language is. Why do you feel that way? You know what I'm saying? Like, can we dig a little bit deeper? Like, we get it. You know what I'm saying? We get that your relationship and your dynamic is off. We get it. Why? So we're at the event. Thank God Sutton's going to get to work because, the episode's been good, but thank God Sutton is going to get to work. And she's basically telling, I believe it was Garcelle and Crystal and Erica, and she's like, I'm really feeling some type of way about ANNEMARIE talking about, she says her body behind her back, and ANNEMARIE walks in as they're talking. So everybody's like, oh God, and Sutton's like, here we go. So, they approach. ANNEMARIE comes with her husband, and she's speaking. They're kissing. And Sutton's immediately like, girl, we need to talk. And she's like, that's fine. And Sutton's like, no, we're going to talk right now. So, ANNEMARIE sends her husband off. And Sutton immediately was like, you have the wrong girl. Like, you're messing with the wrong girl. And ANNEMARIE starts to, she immediately gets defensive. So that kind of makes me feel like they both know. Well, of course Sutton knows, but ANNEMARIE knows that there's an issue there, and she knew that this was coming, and so she kind of came prepared. But I lived for Sutton being like, no ma'am, like, girl, I don't want to hear that. No ma'am, like, you got the wrong girl. I was living. I'm also a no ma'am girl. That's one of my fave sayings. So boom. And throughout this whole conversation, I don't know. It was just so weird, and impossible to me that ANNEMARIE was trying to justify having this concern, as she characterized it, about Sutton's esophagus. I just don't understand. And she even was trying to say, I was just having a concern. She's trying to basically say that she wasn't saying anything negative. But Chris was like, girl, you called her a liar. And Garcelle even joins in, yeah, you said you knew her for 5 minutes and she lied twice. And she's kind of talking around it. ANNEMARIE is. And she's like, well, no, I said it doesn't make sense. And Chris was like, yeah, you said that, but you also called her a liar. So they kind of start having a back and forth. And ANNEMARIE's trying to read Crystal. And it was ANNEMARIE's arms are longest. Because the reach that she came up with about Crystal wanting to be a doctor. And so Crystal is, has resentment because she's not a doctor. And that's why she wants to come for ANNEMARIE. Girl, what? Huh? She's like, yeah, Crystal wanted to go to medical school, so she's upset. And I'm just thinking, what are you talking about? And there's even a weird moment in there where ANNEMARIE tries to call out Crystal, because this hadn't even come up yet. And she's like, well, you're the one that said that Sutton had an eating disorder. And Crystal's like, girl, what? Where's that even coming from? And I'm thinking the same thing. And I immediately went to Twitter, and I'm like, clearly ANNEMARIE is not smart. I'm just not understanding. And she gives me, those people that are really smart. And so everything that they do is in an attempt to tell everybody how smart that they are. But then there's another class of people that just don't really know as much as they want people to think. And they're trying to convince themselves while convincing others. So they're just like, I'm a nurse esthetician. I know about esophaguses. Chris, I don't know. Girl, You're not smart. You couldn't possibly be. And Crystal calls her out for basically talking about Sutton's esophagus for like 2 hours at the event. And we even get like a clip from the producers with timestamps. And the first one was at like 6 something p.m. and the last one was at like 10:51. So it's just like, girl, and she literally is in different parts of the venue talking to different people about Sutton's esophagus. And when they do stuff like that, that tells me that they were trying to make sure that they got on camera. So it seems like ANNEMARIE, who hasn't served a purpose on this show, let's keep it a buck, was going around the party having this conversation to make sure that it was picked up for the show, to make sure that she had something to be relevant about or the show, because it has not occurred. And the producers are clocking her tea, like, girl, that's all you talked about the whole event, and it was not landing. It never landed. So basically, at the end of this conversation, Crystal calls ANNEMARIE a B word. I have no opinion on that, because ANNEMARIE was, like I said, trying to read Crystal and basically say, well, she wanted to go to med school and she's resentful, and she kind of tried to throw the bone on Crystal about the eating disorder thing. So I'm not mad at Crystal. Of course, this narrative is going to keep going that Crystal doesn't speak up for herself, and now she finally does. I still don't really see that, but whatever. I like Crystal, and I'm enjoying what she's bringing this season. So after that, Kyle has a phone call with Sutton. I like this portion of the episode too, because they kind of do this like roundabout thing of phone calls with different people again, but we're kind of getting it. It's kind of mixed in with the montage of like going to a housewife house, showing a snippet. Like it gave that, but with phone calls. It was a combination of the two. And I was living for that edit. And basically Sutton and Kyle are talking, about the trip and about ANNEMARIE. And Sutton basically puts it on Kyle to fix this whole ANNEMARIE thing. And I'm going to give a crumb of a point. I like that Kyle said it was her. She acknowledges that it was her responsibility because she brought ANNEMARIE into the group. But also, I would love for somebody to clock, and I would love for Kyle to take accountability that she started this whole esophagus thing. Like, she's the one that told ANNEMARIE in attempts to be messy because she was feeling some type of way about Sutton. So she started it, and she basically gave ANNEMARIE this bone, and ANNEMARIE's been running around with it for weeks. So I think that's a piece that's missing in the narrative, but nonetheless, Kyle says she's going to handle it. And I appreciate the fact, especially because this isn't going to drag on too. I feel like we got some closure on this. Like, we got a lot of closure this episode, which I lived for. Well, hopefully. You never know if it'll come back up. But, Kyle talks to ANNEMARIE, and she's like, she feels, the trigger words were great because she used the great language. She said she felt ridiculous, and she said she felt horrible, and she said she reflected on it. And, she basically wanted to talk to Sutton and make things right. So I'm happy to hear that, and we can get Kyle out of it because she's just kind of going to nod her way through it anyway. But she also says in this conversation that she doesn't really want to rock with Crystal. She has no intention to speak with Crystal or talk to Crystal because Crystal called her a B word. But I'm like, you tried to read her about med school. So you kind of, I'll leave that alone. So, after that, it comes full circle with the phone call thing. Everybody's talking to everybody. And then finally we get this phone call between ANNEMARIE and Sutton. And I love how Sutton answers the phone. And she's like, girl, I'm eating, just so you know. But, ANNEMARIE's like, I'm calling, to apologize. She seems like somebody that's not great at accountability, and so she said, I apologize for my part. I like that Sutton corrected her on the spot, like, your part. And she kind of gave like 3 different apologies before she got to one that was almost good enough. And so at least they had that conversation. Again, I feel like the conversation she had with Kyle was a little bit better because she used those trigger words like, I reflected, that was ridiculous, I feel bad. I feel like those are the things she should have said to Sutton, as opposed to trying to share accountability with Sutton, where I don't feel like Sutton needed to take any accountability. But at least the conversation was had. Is that going to get me on team ANNEMARIE? No, because I still don't know why she's on this show, but we move. And I did like the edit that they did at the end of, not just saying like, next time on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, they do like a 24 hours later, and we jump to them being on the trip, and we see what's coming next. And it's basically, Crystal and ANNEMARIE getting into it again. And maybe, I feel like maybe ANNEMARIE will give us a little bit more next episode, because now she's spilling some tea about what Crystal allegedly said about the girls. I have an inkling that it's not going to necessarily land that well, because it's my opinion that this is towards the end of the season, and when they drop stuff like this towards the end of the season, it just doesn't get enough room to breathe. So it's probably not that substantial, but we'll see. But what she alleged, would I be surprised if Crystal said that? No. Would I be mad if Crystal said that? No, but I would hope that Crystal in this new era of like speaking up for herself would just be like, well, yeah, I said that and this is why I said it. Because I feel like she has some room to have adverse opinions about this group based on how her last two seasons went. That's my personal opinion, but I also have seen Crystal in these heated moments, especially at reunions, and she just does not articulate herself very well. We'll see. But I personally thought that this was a much better episode. I feel like we maybe got over a hump. I would call last week's episode a hump. And I feel like we got some closure on some silliness from the beginning of the season. And hopefully we're moving to a different leaf now, especially when they go to Spain. But I wish that they would stop playing with us with the Kyle and Mauricio stuff. Like, honestly, I feel like if we're going to get over this hump and do something new, we should be talking about Kyle and Mauricio in Spain. And we should carry it through the end of the season and we should be done with it. But we'll see. And I will see y'all in the next one.